It's a great day to be in Middle Georgia, is it not? Thank you so much for being here. That's a great thing to clap for. Really appreciate you being here. Appreciate everyone who's watching us online as well. And the second annual Middle Georgia National Security Forum. I would go around and introduce our dignitaries, but that would take most of the program because just about everyone here is a dignitary. I do want to thank our elected officials that are here today, also our current general officers, retired general officers that happen to be here. We thank you very much. You will hear more about all of our speakers in a little bit, so I'm not forgetting them. They will be coming up here, and we'll be talking about them soon. My name is John Kubinec, retired Brigadier General from the United States Air Force. It's my honor to be the President and CEO of the 21st Century Partnership here in town, and the partnership is thrilled to be able to co-host this event with our friends, the Museum of Aviation Foundation, and our new friends from the Sam Nunn School of International Studies at Georgia Tech, and you'll get to meet them a little bit later. And we are very thankful for the museum for hosting us in this great venue. There is no better place to talk about innovation than in this forum. When you look around at every display that's here and you think about the innovation that it took to get those platforms in the air. And so no better place to talk about that than here in the home of the National STEM Academy. I think Jeff Brett will talk a little bit, but you'll see some centerpieces today to remind us about that National STEM Academy mission that we have here. And then we're really thrilled to have the Nunn School at Georgia Tech to be partners with us on this National Security Forum. They are thought leaders in international studies and in national security in our nation, and to have them as partners here in Middle Georgia is really special for us. So we thank them very much for doing that. I would like, since we're in his house, I would like to ask the President and CEO of the Museum of Aviation Foundation, Jeff Brett, to come up and say a word of welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to welcome you here today to the Museum of Aviation. We have a fabulous place. We hope you can spend some time, if you can, today. Come back and take a look. I want to just thank our speakers. Thank 21st Century Partnership. We thank Georgia Tech for the partnership in this, for putting this on. This is something we want to try to continue to do. It's something I think there's an appetite for in our community. There's definite need for it in our community as well as our nation. So we thank you for being here. General Kubinec mentioned just a little bit about our National STEM Academy. And we talk about our three pillars, our strategic priorities here at the museum, which are preserve, inspire, and educate. And the educate piece, we always tend to focus on our elementary school programs. You may see some them running around upstairs here about 9:30. They'll start. We have programs going on. But really, our education programs are designed, we call it, for lifelong learners. So this is part of that lifelong learning part that we talk about. And so we really encourage you to spread the word. We want to continue to grow these things at the Museum of Aviation. And I want to thank you for being here today. Hope you enjoy, and we look forward to seeing you back here at the museum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. I have to take my glasses off. I write these notes, and I think I'm going to be able to see them, and I can't see them. So I can't see you, but I can see my notes now, so that's probably good. Unfortunately, you have to see me. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk you through kind of the schedule of events, and as we're going through the day, the goal of this day is to learn, to engage, and then to take action. To listen with an ear to how we're going to take action on what our speakers challenge us with today to make Middle Georgia a better place to innovate and to support national security. So after these introductory comments, we're going to have opening comments from two very special guests, and I'll save that till I introduce them, but I'm really excited about having our guests for our opening comments. And then it'll be my honor to introduce you to Dr. Margaret Kosal from the Sam Nunn School of International Studies at Georgia Tech. She's going to tell us a little bit about the school, and then she will introduce all of our key speakers. And so we'll get into that at that point. Following the speakers and reprising his role from the first National Security Forum is the Honorable Bob McMahon, our very own, who will close up that portion by recapping the speakers, and as he usually always does when you're around General McMahon, he's going to give us some things to think about and tell us what we need to do. So we're looking forward to having General McMahon back to reprise that role. From there, we'll take a break, and I know you'll have questions for the speakers, so don't worry. There are note cards on your table and some pens there, and as you think of a question for our speakers, please write them down, and at the break, give them to one of us, and we will pass that on because we're going to have a question and answer panel up here on the stage after the speakers. And I will tell you, if you're tempted to leave after the break, I will tell you, if you can, please stay, because you won't want to miss the Q&A. From last year's National Security Forum, we found that the Q&A panel and the banter between the speakers is worth the price of admission. So we're really excited about that piece, and we're really pleased to have our own Dr. Joe Richardson, who's the Executive Director of the Middle Georgia Innovation Project, as our moderator. And thank you, Dr. Joe. Before we go any further, when you're here in Middle Georgia and we have an event, there isn't an event that we don't start out with a prayer and a pledge. And I'd like to ask our chairman of the Houston County Board of Commissioners, Dan Perdue, to come up and lead us in that.
Good morning. Thank you, General Kubinec, for this opportunity. Let's pray together, and then we'll stand and say the pledge. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the individuals and the minds and the will that you have gathered in this room. I pray as we learn today, we would remember who the creator of truth is. We would remember who the giver of wisdom is. Lord, I pray that you would sanctify our minds and allow us to think deeply about very important topics in a way that is pleasing and honoring to you. I pray that you would allow us, as we leave this place today, to have the force of will to engage on these topics continuously and to do what is asked of us, to be responsive to what we have learned today. Lord, I pray that you would bless this time. Let us remember that our safety, our freedom has not been bought cheaply, but that many have sacrificed much. Lord, that you would remind us of that, and Lord, that we would respond accordingly. Bless this time. In Jesus' name, amen. If you would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership here in Houston County. I remind our friends here in Middle Georgia that a prayer and a pledge is not something that happens everywhere in our nation when you start an event. It's something that drew us here to Middle Georgia and makes this place very special. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now I'd like to introduce for welcoming comments our commander here at Robins Air Force Base, Brigadier General Jon Eberlan. General, if you'll start making your way up here. We are thrilled and honored to have General Eberlan as our commander. Having been a previous commander here and knowing everyone who's been in the role that he's in, I can say this without hesitation that there's not been a better commander for our Warner Robins Air Logistics Complex than General Eberlan. He's doing an amazing job. He is a thoughtful leader. He gets after the business of our nation in a very aggressive way, and he's always looking at how to make things better. He is integrated into this community amazingly quick, and we are very honored to have him as our commander, General Eberlan.
Good morning. Truth up front, I got back to my house at midnight from 2 days at Wright Pat talking strategy with General Richardson, so I'll try not to slur my speech or and clean the drawl up as best I can. I want to thank each and every one of you for being with us today. Innovation is critical to where we're going as a nation and as an Air Force. It's the one thing when you look at great power competition and you look at, the competitive, the strategic environment, that it offers the most hope for us to, basically succeed and win. And it requires an ecosystem to incubate it. I spent a year at the Eisenhower School for Senior Developmental Education, and I did the education industry study, and we took a trip to China, and we met with the president of Shanghai University, and her one question to us was, how can we be more innovative? And a lot of it is cultural. We live in a society where we encourage challenging the status quo. And that's what we have to do. I just spent 2 days talking about digital material management and what that means for Air Force Material Command. And I mean, that's basically the whole acquisition life cycle in a digital environment to come up with solutions that aren't necessarily intuitive. And we have a lot of work to do in the depot in terms of upgrading our facilities. We're using artificial intelligence, machine learning. There's all kinds of technology out there. We just have to move faster. And so my challenge to the community, the one thing where I think we are uniquely postured to succeed here in Middle Georgia is through the partnership with the 21st Century Partnership with General Kubinec and Dan Slagle and their leadership, as well as our educational partnerships with our technical colleges and the institutions of higher learning that we have. And so we need to continue to capitalize on that, because I will tell you, when you start looking at the types of weapon systems that we're going to be maintaining in the future, you hear the words open-ended architecture. It's more software engineers, more digital engineering. It's all kinds of highly technical, specialized career fields that we just can't keep or hire fast enough. And so we have to continue to work together to produce that pipeline, because we're fortunate enough here. There are three depots in the United States Air Force, and we're fortunate enough to have one here in Middle Georgia. And every one of our depots across the Air Force is an engine of readiness. Our war fighters depend on the product that we put out and produce. We have three. It is a strategic asset. And we need to continue to revitalize through innovation and make our depots viable and continue to generate more and more readiness for our warfighter. It's an honor to be with each and every one of you today. And thank you for what you do for Robins Air Force Base and our Air Logistics Complex. Thank you.
Thank you, General, and thank you for prioritizing time to come and speak with us this morning. Next, I'd like to introduce someone who does not need an introduction. We're fortunate, not only do we have the Sam Nunn School of International Studies with us, but we have Senator Sam Nunn with us today, too. Let me just briefly say that this museum would not exist without Senator Nunn, and I think it's fair to say this Air Force Base would not exist without Senator Nunn. And Senator Nunn is the inspiration for this National Security Forum. If you may not know, that last year we held the first National Security Forum in conjunction with Major General Tanya Kubinec's retirement. She wanted to do something different from her retirement, and so wanted to have a National Security Forum. And she was inspired by that because we went to Senator Nunn's 80th birthday party at Georgia Tech, and there was some ice cream, but there was a policy discussion. And we talked about policy for a number of hours, which was amazing. And Tanya's like, I want to do something that makes a difference like Senator Nunn did. So, sir, we are honored to have you here today. We thank you for what you've done for Middle Georgia, for Robins Air Force Base, for being the inspiration of this National Security Forum, and I'm honored to call you my friend.
Thank you very much, John, and It's a great honor to be here. And General Eberlan, we are excited to have you, but just one note, don't worry about slurring your speech. That's the kind of language we understand in Middle Georgia. So we understand your Texas accent. We are awfully glad to have you here. So I'm glad to join this morning General Eberlan, General Kubinec, and John, you're still making tremendous contributions to this community. So we're so proud that you have made, you and Tanya have made this your home. Also very proud to have Dr. Margaret Kosal here of Georgia Tech. Dr. Kosal is an outstanding member of the Georgia Tech faculty, and we are certainly very proud of her. And also proud of this audience this morning. I see the leaders of all over Middle Georgia, and the fact that you folks work together and have for a long time is what has made this place so special and so unique. And Dan, thank you for your leadership. And Tommy, of course, did such a terrific job for so long, and you come with all the credentials to follow in his big footsteps. So we're very proud to have you in the position of chairman. Also want to thank in advance Beverly Seay, Josh Altman, Joe Richardson, and of course our keynote, Will Roper, for sharing your thoughts with us today. We at the Nunn School of International Affairs, partnering with our great supporter and longtime forum backer with tremendous generosity, Bank of America. They have helped sponsor our forums at the Nunn School for a long number of years. We're very grateful that continues today. And we're excited to join the Robbins 21st Century Partnership and this terrific Museum of Aviation. Your inspiration and your education and your preservation have meant so much to our Middle Georgia community, to the state of Georgia, but most of all to the young people who we will depend on for our nation's security as you inspire and educate them. At the Nunn School, our scholars are uniquely qualified to help connect national security policymakers with the innovative technology community. All of us are enormously grateful for the men and women in uniform and civilians who serve at Robbins. And we are also very grateful for the leading role of the U.S. Air Force in transforming digital engineering research and development into operational capabilities. This innovation also has huge potential from what I have read, and I'm going to learn a lot more this morning from Dr. Roper, but it has huge potential in the commercial sector. Literally a revolution in procurement, a revolution in effectiveness and efficiency. So I've got my yellow pad, Will, and I'm going to be taking notes this morning. And one of the people that I will see in the next couple of days is an admirer of yours. You may not have met him, but former Secretary of Air Force Don Rice has been a friend of mine a long time. And Don has always known the great importance of this installation. And in fact, I remember the phone call I got from Don. Dates me, but many years ago when he called me and told me the J-Star program was going to be housed here at Robbins. And of course, that one has served us so well, and now it is being replaced. And of course, that technology is going to be very exciting too. General Eberlan, we are very proud and excited to have you at Robbins. My usually reliable spies tell me that you and your Robbins team have had a record-breaking year of aircraft production, and boy, do we need it with the problems we've got in the world today. All of us applaud the important role of Robbins in enabling our Air Force to help protect the security of our nation in this increasingly troubled and very dangerous world. General, my usually reliable spies also tell me that you have a very suspicious golf handicap and that I should get at least one stroke a hole if we ever tee it up, and I hope that will happen soon. So we're very proud to have you here in Middle Georgia. We're also excited to have two of the Nunn School stars. I've mentioned them already, but Dr. Kosal and Dr. Will Roper we're looking very much forward to hearing Dr. Roper explain what he calls the, quote, digital trinity, end quote, which is playing an increasingly crucial role in boosting our technological edge in the Air Force, the U.S. military, and ensuring our global competitiveness. So this is going to be a very, very interesting and important subject. I would also like to commend and thank General Tanya Kubinec, who is really the founder of this forum. So Tanya, thank you very much. Last year, Tanya focused all of us on the importance of resiliency, and she proved how valuable these forums can be in shaping our commitment and our priorities as we tackle today's global challenges. So thank you, Tanya, and glad for you to be here again this year. I think this forum will be a continuing, very important contributor to the U.S. Air Force and to this community for a long time to come. I'm very proud that Georgia Tech and Robins Air Force Base, two of the, I think, biggest contributors to our nation's security, have teamed up for today's forum. Dr. Margaret Kosal, an outstanding national security expert, as I've mentioned, and professor at the Nunn School at Georgia Tech, will introduce Dr. Roper, who, as Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, championed this trailblazing innovative technology and program we'll be hearing about today. In General Jon Kubinec's words, Will Roper has done more than anyone in a generation to drive true innovation in the U.S. Air Force, end quote. We're also honored to have the former commander of Robins ALC, our old friend and former Secretary of Defense, McMahon, and his very young wife. We're delighted, hope that you two have settled back here. So welcome, at least from my perspective. I know many have already welcomed you over the last year or so, but we're very proud to have you back in Middle Georgia. General McMahon will conclude our program, as John has mentioned, by putting our challenges as well as our opportunities in this troubled world in perspective. I'm very optimistic that when we leave here in a few hours, we will be armed with additional valuable knowledge and renewed determination to make Middle Georgia and our state a hub, an even more important hub for national security and innovation. So I thank the entire team that put this program together and making it possible for us to learn and focus today on one of our most important opportunities. Thank you very much.
I think we all realize how blessed we are to have an example of leadership and service in this community like Senator Nunn. Senator, thank you so much again for being with us. It's my honor now to introduce my new friend, Dr. Margaret Kosal from the Sam Nunn School of International Studies. You heard from Senator Nunn of her bona fides, but I would say not only is Dr. Kosal a thought leader in national security and innovation, but she has been a practitioner. She's walked the halls of that five-sided building in Washington, D.C. She has led at the highest levels and advised the highest levels of our government, and she is a great and perfect partner for us for this National Security Forum.
So good morning, all. First off, I want to thank our partners, the 21st Century Security Project. I know I did not get that correct. I want to call out Dan Rhodes, Lori, Lisa, and of course from the Nunn School, Mary Lou. Without their help, we could not have put this together. So I'm starting by recognizing those people who are the ones who made sure that everything we have here is what we've got. I will thank Senator Nunn, General Kubinec for a very kind introduction. So I've been tasked with a few things. I send regrets for not being able to attend from the chair of the Nunn School, Professor Adam Stolberg. He asked me to make sure to highlight a couple of things about the Nunn School. We are a school of international affairs. Most of the faculty are trained as political scientists or international relations scholars, but we also have individuals who are trained as computer scientists. We have people who are trained as have PhDs in chemistry. So we are an intentionally multidisciplinary school. And as part of that, we have a number of programs that kind of cross campus. For example, we have graduate certificates between the Nunn School and nuclear engineering, focusing on emerging technologies and nonproliferation. We have a graduate certificate with aeronautical engineering, focusing on wargaming, scenario, path gaming, modeling, and simulation. We are part of a certificate of astrobiology, understanding what the biology in the cosmos might be like. We are working with computer science to develop a graduate certificate in intelligence. And finally, we also have a new, just launched this fall, 100% online master's degree in international security. Like Senator Nunn, I also want to acknowledge and thank B of A for their long-standing and very appreciated support. We are grateful for the role that they play in enabling events and forums like this. And as has been said, we're already thinking about and looking forward to the next Middle Georgia Forum. So finally, to further some of Senator Nunn's comments on the unique role that the Nunn School faculty and research plays in connecting national security and international politics, connecting to policymakers and the technology innovation communities, I'd like to offer some examples from my own work and others. So at the end of August, I was in Sofia, Bulgaria, to speak at a NATO meeting on cognitive warfare. So this was emerging technologies, neurotechnologies, cognitive science, AI, ML, and how they intersect with geopolitics and NATO strategy. The following week, I was in London to speak at the UK's Royal Society's Neural Interface Summit. That meeting had what you might suspect would be the usual suspects of academic engineers, scientists. There were a few lawyers, some ethicists, social scientists, as well as a large number of folks from the tech investment and venture capital area. When I got back to Konus, one of the things that was on my list to do was I was leading the first meeting of a new U.S. National Academies of Science committee that I'm chairing on engaging scientists in shared responsible innovation in neuroscience in Southeast Asia. So what does responsible innovation mean? In this case, what it means is security. The office that is sponsoring this National Academy's work is the State Department's Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. That is the program that Senator Nunn and Senator Lugar began so many years ago. Now we're looking at shaping and reducing threats of emerging technologies in places like Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and others. So those three examples that I gave are a vivid illustration of a multiple of things. But I will note specifically how inherently multidisciplinary these emerging and digitally enabled technologies are. They are in ways that sometimes make those of us of a certain age, myself included now, quite uncomfortable. But younger generations are truly digital natives, approaching strategy and policy to address the challenges of emerging technologies requires recognition of the multi and interdisciplinary nature of the problems, as well as working across generations to resonate with our theme and working internationally. So I'm faculty. I'm trained to speak in 50-minute intervals, but I won't. I do, however, want to mention the work of a few of my other colleagues from the Nunn School and our amazing students who are working at this intersection of science, technology, and international security. For example, 2 of my faculty colleagues were in Azerbaijan earlier this month for the meeting of the International Aeronautical Union. One of my colleagues will be starting a Council on Foreign Relations fellowship serving in OSD in January. So a previous faculty colleague did one of these fellowship positions where he worked in 2 different offices in OSD. The first one, he was serving as country director for Egypt, i.e. a GS-15 position. And in that role, he coordinated and managed military-to-military relationships with Egypt and advised senior leadership. And then the second office he served in, resonating very much with a number of things that are central to the Nunn School, he served in the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office, among other responsibilities, where he was the Department of Defense's lead for the Proliferation Security Initiative. So we don't know what my colleague going in January is doing, but I expect that she will be doing similar things. We have another faculty member who, along with an undergrad student from in one of the engineering schools, did work advising the European Union on its approaches to AI governance. We have another faculty member who's working on linked transatlantic 2-level games and the taxation of the digital economy, i.e. how firms and governments across the globe are negotiating the disconnect between the digitized economy and the global tax system. I could go on and on about our PhD students and also our amazing undergrads, but just to highlight the work of a few. We've got one who's looking at understanding China's approaches to quantum technology. We have had another one who recently graduated, who we sent back to the U.S. Air Force Academy, where he is teaching, who worked on whether the U.S. should maintain entanglement as a policy for space-based assets. We've got another one of our PhD students looking at implications of artificial intelligence for deterrence. So I could continue talking about the amazing work my Nunn School colleagues and our students do, but I know that's not what you came here to hear. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Will Roper. Among Dr. Roper's many positions, you've heard a few of them earlier, he is currently the founder and CEO of technology startup Istari Digital. He serves on a number of boards. As was mentioned, he also previously served as Assistant Secretary of the Air Force. He began his career at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, aka the GTRI of the North, where he supported the missile defense agencies as their chief futurist. However, from a Georgia Tech perspective, his most notable accolade is that he has 2 degrees in physics from Georgia Tech. So with that, please welcome Dr. Will Roper.
Well, good morning, everyone. We have a very important task ahead of us. We have to have a discussion about national security that is relevant here in Middle Georgia and defeat the enemy that is the fan system here. So, having worked in Washington for many years, I am used to there being a lot of air in the room, but not a lot of there. But I know that might be different here in Warner Robins, where things get done. So I'll try to speak slowly. I'll try to enunciate, which I know is difficult, being someone here from Middle Georgia myself. But we're going to get through this, and I'd like to be able to leave you with a few ideas about where national security is going and how technology is going to affect it, and how Middle Georgia can play a role. I want to begin, but before I do that, I just want to say I had such an amazing time serving as Assistant Secretary in the United States Air Force. The embrace that I felt from everyone, being a fairly young person with big ideas about how to do innovation and just generally be disruptive, could not have been in a better family than the United States Air Force became. And when I would come to the air logistics complexes, including right here in Robbins, they're an amazing treasure trove of innovation. The things that happen to keep the airplanes around us in the past and the airplanes we use today flying, it's nothing short of miraculous. And I definitely want to end by an idea about how Robbins could be different in a future where technology that is at the cusp of changing the world has already changed national security. So hopefully we'll end there. And then as we get into the panel discussion, I hope you've got some good questions. I learned much, much more from questions than any other type of speaking event. So please write them, use them. So let's start with a couple of things. Let's start with how do military systems come into being right now in Washington? It's important to know that, to think about the future. How does it work today? And it works. The systems that are being used by the men and women in uniform are better than any others around the globe. So despite the very trendy knocking of the government bureaucracy, which is very trendy to do in Washington, the wheels do turn, and it produces amazing military platforms that are the envy of the rest of the world. It's also worth noting that the system that is churning out the amazing airplanes and everything else that we use is still more or less the system that we had in place in the Cold War. And it's also worth mentioning that that system won the Cold War. It produced systems that the Soviet Union could not keep up with, imposed cost, and finally broke the bank and led to a different changing of the world order. Now that's mentioned somewhat frequently in Washington. Generally known that we built systems and that the Soviet Union could not keep up with them. But what is rarely said after that is that the Defense Department's long lead investments in areas of deep tech went on to create the information age. Now just think about it, right? The Defense Department was investing in computers when computers were still bespoke and expensive, and microprocessors, high-gain antenna, satellites, even the internet began as a DARPA program. Well, in competing decade after decade against the Soviet Union, putting dollar after dollar in to making sure that this new technology was available for warfighting systems, it was doing something important economically. It was starting to change the potential to commercialize, changing producibility, changing price point. And after the Soviet Union collapsed and the Pentagon really diverted attention to other places, the trend that was put in place continued and led to the information age. You can argue very soundly, I think, that it wouldn't have happened without those decades of investment in areas of new technology. From that point of view, the creation of the information age is one of the greatest accomplishments that the United States military can take credit for, rightfully. And an interesting idea that I think Washington has lost amidst all of its hot air is that that's the role our nation needs it to play again, especially in competing against a peer like China. We need it to look strategically at areas of deep tech that it can invest in to make amazing military systems that can go on to commercialize and create industrial revolutions right here with a US zip code. I can promise you from 10 years of serving in the Pentagon, that is an idea that you will not find there. That is viewed as something other than the core mission. Technology is not a battlefield. Battlefields are on the globe, would be the general response. And I think technology is it is so transformative, so amazing, so fast, so adaptable, that if we don't treat it as a battlefield with a national strategy to win, then we may find a nation that has that strategy bringing things to bear that we don't have. And I don't want to be writing the playbook on that side of history. So I want to talk a bit about what those technologies are, at least in my opinion, and of course hear from you, because you're reading in the news everything that I'm reading, and I'm sure fascinated by the breakthroughs that are happening. Now, before I get into the technology, let me tie the bow on the Cold War procurement system. Now that I've said good things about it, that it won the Cold War, that it created an industrial revolution that has given the US unimaginable soft power. The fact that the information age happened on US soil, if we were to try to quantify the advantages that has given us in terms of companies being created for our educational system, shifting to produce the people to feed these amazing jobs that are located here, and then the technology being adopted globally, it's had an unimaginably positive effect on the security of our nation. We're going to need that again. So I've said all the good things about the Cold War procurement system. Now let me say a few bad things, some things that need to change. It doesn't work well in a world where technology increasingly isn't invented in the United States government. That was an insight I had after a few years of working in the government, is that this system that created all of the airplanes around us here really begins with the assumption it has to invent its own technology. It doesn't work well when the technology is being invented in the private sector for commercial uses. But that made sense during the time. I mean, the Cold War procurement system was birthed in an era where computers were still expensive to make. And if you could make one a little smaller, a little faster, that's a PhD in and of itself, much less putting it into an airplane so that we can have a digital radar or a digitally guided weapon. All of those breakthroughs that happened during the Cold War were at a time when technology was slow and expensive, and you had to stay at it to make breakthroughs. Well, that system more or less is still in place, and it doesn't work well when technologies like artificial intelligence or quantum computing or any of the others that you are familiar with, when they have so much more capital than the Pentagon can put at them, coming from private investors for private sector purposes, it just doesn't know, well, how do I go buy that? Well, you can't. You can't stop innovation. You can't stop economics. So a different system will have to be in place, one that knows how to partner with external technology, how to leverage it, how to influence it so that you have access to it, knowing that you can't purchase it and control it the way that you could with government-developed technologies like stealth. That's a very challenging thing right now in Washington. In fact, it's been very interesting being on the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Board and trying to share some advice. This is the recurring advice that I share, and it often falls on deaf ears. How do we partner? And I think it's fairly obvious. It's fairly obvious the role that the Pentagon plays or should play when the technology is being developed in the private sector for private purposes. And that is as the first adopter. That is the role that the United States military has played with the last generation of technology. And I think right now our nation needs it to play that role again. So what does that mean? I'll give you an example from a program that I found split the Air Force during my time with it. People either loved it or hated it. I found no one in the middle on this issue. And it's centered around a new class of airplane that take off vertically and then fly, like a helicopter, and then fly horizontally. These are sometimes called VTOLs, vertical takeoff and landing. They're interesting because they're different. They're a little like an Osprey, but much cheaper, electrically powered or hybrid powered. And when I looked at them, most of us called them flying cars, and that's what they were referred to in the press, and they were neat, and I just was fascinated with anything new that was going to be happening in aviation and wanted to be aware of it. When you looked at that class of vehicle, it's not going to replace a fighter jet or something like the C-5, but there were some uses that you could imagine. Logistics at the edge and special forces missions, given that electric airplanes are pretty quiet compared to those that are powered by jet fuel. So I had an interest in them, and when I was briefed by the major consultancies in the US about how big the commercial market could be, not just the military uses, but how big the commercial market could be, then my view of this little interesting industry changed completely. Because the commercial market potential was huge to change transformation, to change logistics, because there's a new class of aircraft that can affordably be operated between points that traditional aircraft can't. And so their predictions were this is going to start shrinking the country. People will be more connected. Goods will be more connected. Logistics will speed up. They'll be able to do more time-critical things for delivery and supply. And I got it. I was like, yeah, this is a big deal. Even if it's not as big of a deal for the battlefield, it's a big deal for our nation. And then I was also very aware of what had happened with the birth of DJI, the Chinese company that makes most of the hobbyist drones that fly around. That technology was also birthed here in the US, but it wasn't a big deal for warfare, right? We just kind of invented it, birthed it, and watched as all of the supply chain and production globalized overseas. And then later, once DJI had stood up and cornered the market, we did find some interesting uses for small drones in the military, and I had to sign off on every single one of those waivers where we were using a Chinese drone for some military purpose because I couldn't buy one in the US. Technology we created, we didn't have a national strategy for it, we watched it globalize, and now it's imposing itself on us. And so for these bigger electric airplanes, I thought the same thing will happen that happened with DJI if we don't get involved. And so we did. I had some members of Congress put $50 million towards that program, which is not a lot in the military's budget. And we helped companies building these new classes of airplane. Your men and women in the Air Force took them through certification, airworthiness, allowed U.S. like bases and airspace to be used to fly. The first revenue was generated inside the military. And once we got to certifying those systems in the military, commercial investment went exponential. The commercial investors didn't know how to look at these airplanes and say, are they safe or not? That's not really the role the FAA plays either. That's typically the role the United States Air Force plays. Telling you if something that's never flown before is safe to fly, that's an Air Force function, a unique function for this nation. And by bringing this unique function and helping an emerging market, an emerging industry, it was like a good housekeeping seal of approval for it. And once that good housekeeping seal of approval, which is based on the trust in the Air Force, was there, then private investment from Amazon and UPS and just venture capital in general started pouring in, and companies went public with billion-dollar valuations. And now it's a legitimate market that has a great potential for the U.S. economy and as a form of soft power globally for $50 million, billions of dollars of revenue potential being generated. That to me in a nutshell, and by the way, people either loved it, said that's exactly what we ought to be doing, is making sure that we're winning the battle for new technology and new markets. Others in the Pentagon said, what are we doing, right? These airplanes, they're not going to go shoot down fighter jets. They're not going to move heavy equipment on the battlefield. Why are we involved? I think it's still a controversial idea today. But in my opinion, we've got to compete for this technology before we can even make military systems with it. And if we don't, then what happened with DJI will happen again and again and again. So that's what I wish the procurement system would change into. It would learn how to partner, how to align interest. And there are a lot of other things, not just electric airplanes, that need it. The whole topic of generative AI needs early adoption and regulation and certification because the creators of it are looking at the potential for both good and ill and are testifying in Congress asking for help. And yet there isn't help yet. And I think it's just a playbook that the Pentagon needs. Now let's presume, for the sake of this talk, that the Pentagon gets this playbook. It learns how to look at an emerging market, a commercial trend, and align its market. The military is a market, right? It buys things, it uses things, it pays for things, and it adopts things differently, which is often its value proposition. The Cold War procurement system thinks its value proposition is just money. But in today's world, it's bigger than that. It's the adoption and the data, the feedback that's produced is much more valuable than the money. Data is the most valuable thing in the world, and the military market can produce data on new technology before any other part of our society can. So there's a role for almost everything. Now let's presume that we've got that. I want to look ahead to national security and what we need to be wary of, and then we'll bring it home here to Robbins and what this community, this amazing base can do. So some of you know, I accepted doing this keynote. It's a great honor to do it, by the way. Before I knew I was going to be going to Ukraine and embedding with units on the front line, I did that. So it was a transformative experience, and I will forever be changed and grateful to the men and women who took risk to show me how they take risk with their lives in a very different kind of war every day. And I want to share a few things I took away and what we need to be ready for in the U.S. Air Force, U.S. military, and as a nation. What I saw were things that I had written about, discussed with great defense leaders like Secretary Carter, who I just don't know if I can underscore how much our nation will miss with his very early and unfortunate departure. But another great visionary for the future of national security that I had the privilege of working for so many years. We talked about what is now happening in Ukraine. Let me tell you a few of the things. So you're probably aware that commercial drones, the DJI class drones I mentioned, are having an enormous impact on the battlefield, but it's one that is now being equaled by Russia. The novelty of it has already been neutralized because the technology is broadly available. You've got a great idea, your adversary can have that great idea too, and so you're not going to have a window of surprise for very long. The other thing that jumps out really quickly when you're with these brave men and women that are operating these drones is that if there were better software for them, it would change everything. Everything. They're being used the way their designers intended, with like a hobbyist would, where you've got a remote control and you can fly them and you're streaming back video. not much of that makes sense on the battlefield, right? You can only scale with people operating. Your performance is only as good as that operator's proficiency, and you've got to have high definition video streaming back and forth, which is not going to be against any peer adversary that can jam comms and GPS. Right, it's pretty much playing the role of a sniper on the battlefield. Very good, very proficient, but not something you can scale and surge. And if we just couple that commercial supply chain that creates the drones with a little bit of autonomy and artificial intelligence so that it could navigate using terrain features, identify targets of interest, and rather than push video back to someone that's joysticking it, just push back an image and ask a human, am I okay to execute on this target, yes or no? It would change everything. It would be scalable. You could go from having drone snipers to drone infantry that could be surged on positions, push out Russian invaders, and keep Ukrainian forces who put their lives at risk much safer. It's a war that can be won with software. It's a war that can be won with algorithms. And the US military is not in a position to supply them. We are not a military that is excellent at software, excellent at AI. In fact, the U-2 behind us, when I was still serving in the Air Force, we allowed AI to be a co-pilot on a U-2. That's the first time that had ever happened. We had AI running on a jet and running safely. That's the devil's in the details on how do you know you can trust it. Let's just accept that you can. Well, nothing's really happened on that, right? It's far easier for the Cold War procurement system to go buy airplanes that you can take pictures of, or ships, or things like that. It's much harder to justify digital dominance. Can you take a picture of it? You know, how many are you building in my district, in my state? It's harder. But system doesn't, naturally align around it. But coming back from Ukraine, a war that can be won with software, won with algorithms, and we're not ready to supply them to those brave men and women, is a wake-up call, should be a wake-up call yesterday for the Pentagon, for the US military as a whole. We have to have digital dominance, algorithmic dominance, because it can be so fast, so agile, and it's a tide that raises all boats, or a wind that raises all airplanes, to be a little more appropriate from here. It allows this responsiveness and scalability and simplifies logistics. I generally left thinking almost every classical hardware counter that Russia would do, I can think of a way to beat it with software, and software is so much faster than hardware. So that was the big wake-up call I brought back. Now let me kind of take a step to what can happen here at Robbins, and just generally what the US needs to be thinking about on national security's intersection with technology. First and foremost, coming back from a war that can be won with software, we need to get ready for that war. And that means using algorithms to do things that they don't do today, where humans and expensive assets can be at risk. We don't currently have a process for that in the US. We don't let big drones just fly overhead. But that's an area where I could see partnership between the government and industry to de-risk that first for military use, so it eventually can commercialize and have a broader economic impact. We need to know, for artificial intelligence, we need to know what we can use it for at a level of risk that's acceptable. And within the military, within Washington, there just isn't enough technical know-how on artificial intelligence. It's all one big thing to them, and it's not. There are very different specialties happening that the US government needs to have the technical chops, not to develop, but to understand and work with, and it doesn't. So that's another thing that must happen. And then finally, there's something else happening in the background that doesn't get as much of the microphone as it needs to, but I think it could be I think it could be the foundation for that next industrial revolution. You've heard it mentioned, like digitization, or digital engineering, or digital lifecycle management. What does all of this mean? It just sounds like software. It's a little different. It's a little different in that models and simulations in many industries are now good enough to substitute for reality. That is a new thing. Formula One does it already. They've created models and simulations that are integrated together such that they can design digital race cars that they know will operate within hundredths of a second in like similar performance to the physical car, rounding error differences in performance. So this idea of a digital twin is real and operative and powerful in Formula One. In fact, in the time I've been talking, most of the race teams have already built a few digital cars and certified. Well, why is this a big deal? Well, it's not just happening in Formula One racing. It's happening in medical devices. It's happening in agriculture. It's happening in medicine itself. We can model the universe so well that we no longer have to have the slow, expensive prototyping, testing, certifying process that costs billions to create the airplanes around us. We can do that at the speed and cost of code, so that by the time we actually make something physical, it's perfect. And even while we're making it, its successor and then its successor are already being digitally made, digitally manufactured. It's a weird thing to say, but it's real. Digitally operated, digitally maintained, so that if we have to do it in the real world, we're already perfect at it. Well, that sounds like something we want to be on the right side of, because it sounds like making hardware into software, and we all know what a big deal the software revolution has been, creating the Internet of Things. What happens when everything has a digital twin? What advantage will it give to the nation that drives that change? Oh, and it gets worse too, right? Is once you've created a digital version of something, now you can bring artificial intelligence to be part of the life cycle. Like, the universe is too slow to train AI to design something physical. The only way we could train it to be a co-pilot on the U-2 was in the simulator. It needed like 10 million flight hours, the equivalent of that, which isn't going to happen in the real world. You know, it's not, these algorithms, although we treat them as very smart, they're just learning through a level of trial and error that humans cannot participate in. And we do it on computers so that we can shrink it into a small window. So the AI only learned how to operate a physical U-2 because it had access to a digital one. Well, that's happening in other industries. AI is designing medicines that are beyond humans' ability to design, maybe even test. That, to me, that confluence of creating a digital world and bringing the amazing artificial intelligence that already is changing our world, it seems like we need to be on the right side of that. If the lesson from Ukraine is that wars will now be won or lost based on software. So what do we do right here in Middle Georgia? Well, one, anything you can do on STEM to encourage people that this is a great place to educate themselves, you should do. Also, as things digitize, companies are starting to change. Leading digital companies can be created here that are working with people around the globe, because this digital universe that we're slowly creating, industry by industry, allows people to be in different parts of the world and participate in a way that can be added together, just like coding teams are already global. So companies can be created to drive this. And then right here at Robbins, anything that is physical, we have to fight to get its digital version and start learning more with its digital copy than we do with its physical one. Why? Because it's faster, cheaper, and we will be perfect in the real world before our adversaries will. So stepping back to all of this, you know, let's give the procurement system a little credit on winning the Cold War, creating the information age, and a generation of soft power that have made all of our lives better. But now with a young daughter looking ahead to her future, we need our government and our military to do the same, to see clear-eyed at the technologies that will change the battlefield and then subsequently the world. And almost all of them are digital. We need to get off the dime. Doesn't mean we have to quit loving hardware, but we need a deep, devoted love of software and all technologies digital. We need to make it existentially important for our dominance. We need to invest in it year after year with military dollars, de-risk it for the battlefield, and then hope we do enough that it can commercialize so that the next industrial revolution happens right here on US soil. An information age changing into a digital age where it's not just software and data that's digital. Increasingly, it's a copy of the world that we live in, maybe even a copy of us. I hope this has been helpful in some way. It's a lot to digest. The good news is this can be done. The bad news is we have to change about everything for how we do business today. Thanks for your time today.
Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, the Honorable Beverly Seay. Bev is the Southeast Regional Director for the National Security Innovation Network. This is a program within the U.S. Department of Defense that is doing some truly amazing things. I had the privilege to spend some time with Bev yesterday in Atlanta traffic and the way down here, and she is truly an inspiration in so many ways. She has now made me one of her biggest fans. So in her current role, she's going to talk about, she's focusing on leveraging the kind of talent that Will articulated that we need. And she's doing this through partnerships with universities and the venture community to drive innovation in national security. Bev has a long professional career in which she was instrumental in early she was an early entrepreneur and instrumental in the modeling and simulation defense industry. She has global experience, a Fortune 500 track record. She's led business operations here in the United States and globally. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Bev Seay.
Thank you, Dr. Kosal, and thank you all for inviting me to come speak. It's an honor to be here. After listening to Will's phenomenal description of the challenge that we have ahead of us, I'm hoping that I can give you a few ideas today for Middle Georgia about how to address some of these challenges. And I also want to say that given my long career, it's music to my ears to hear changing hardware into software. I had to get my master's in computer engineering to get the respect of the hardware people. And I will say during my career, where I was often the only woman, it wasn't the fact that I was a woman that was holding me back. It was the fact that I was a software person. So how the world changes, and it changes quickly. So Maggie described a little bit in the introduction the National Security Innovation Network. I put this chart up here to give you an idea of where we fit. We're within the Defense Innovation Unit, and that reports directly to SECDA. Excellent. And INSIN is at the top of the innovation funnel for the Department of Defense. We're out there looking for the non-traditional innovators in the classroom, with the students, with the faculty, in the early stage ventures, and we're talking to them about the problems that we have in the Department of Defense and getting them excited and interested. These are people and companies that aren't even thinking about the issues that we have in the Department of Defense. And we're able to work with them to get them into a state where then they can move on to other organizations like DIU to capitalize and scale what they're doing and move it on down the line to deployment. So this is our business process. On the left, I described we have these startups, private sector, these talent, academia, and they're being fed these requirements that come from the right side, the Department of Defense. We call our DoD organization leaders and our Army and Navy and Air Force, all of the services, we call them our mission partners. And they're addressing technical gaps and other issues that they have. For whatever reason, they can't solve them. Maybe they don't have the talent. Maybe they don't have the resources or funding. But they can tell us what their challenges are, and then we can help find that matchmaking, do that tech scouting. So I'll give you an example of something we've got going on right here in Central Florida. So at the University of Central Florida, we had the computing senior design class. Before I started with Ensign, none of those senior designers were working on any DoD problems. Today, a couple years later, I have 150 students just in computing working on Department of Defense problems. We have these programs that allow us to go from solution discovery to actual senior design where they're building, to even forming companies. And I have students that had a problem that came in from Army Cyber Command on how do you train electronic warfare soldiers. It's very expensive to do that. It's the type of thing that's perfect for simulation. Rather than having to bring everybody to one place, having different levels of skills, having equipment that's expensive and not always available, only being able to train to a certain level because you can't get all the different permutations of the challenges out of that equipment. So the students spent a semester doing lean startup. At UCF, we call it Entrepreneurship for Defense. We spent that semester interviewing over 50 stakeholders in this problem and decided the solution should be a game. They took that solution to their sponsor, who was Army Central Command, and said, we think a game. So the chief who'd been overseeing this knew that the Central Command was going to have an Oasis Shark Tank competition. And each of the organizations in Central Command, in this case the Army, would present their solution. And so these students worked with the chief, presented it for the Army, and they won. So they got to go to Central Command, to the Oasis Shark Tank, and present their capability with the chief in front of a group of judges, which included 2 former Shark Tank judges. Quite an experience. And out of that, they were so excited. They've garnered so much interest in what they're doing with this game that they decided to go ahead and form a company, take the solution to the senior design class. So this, at the time, sophomore and junior at the university now have senior designers building the prototype, and then they'll take it into the game program at the University of Central Florida for gamification, and eventually they'll have something that they can provide to the DoD. So that's an example of how all of our programs can come together with a group of students and get a solution for the Department of Defense. Next slide, please. So we are a network. We achieve what we're trying to accomplish in innovation through this network across the entire country. I happen to be located in Orlando, so that's why I described to you what we're doing in Central Florida. We do it through talent in our venture programs, and we have a transition team that helps move these solutions along to adoption. As was mentioned in the introduction, I am the Southeast Regional Director for INSEN, so Georgia is in my territory. I love being in Georgia. I've worked with Georgia Tech for about 20 years, since my daughter attended and graduated. And it's always a great experience to come to Georgia Tech and talk about what we're doing in Central Florida and what's going on in Atlanta and how we can work together. Allison Beatty is the Regional Engagement Principal for Georgia, and Allison is here today, so I hope you'll have the chance to get to meet her. Next slide, please. So I mentioned, here's a few things. I'll talk a little more about this as we go on, because this is something that I think would be interesting to Middle Georgia. So we have a Southeast Regional Hub, and the location is Team Orlando. That's an $8 to $8.5 billion organization, acquisition. All the services are represented in modeling and simulation. So Will mentioned how key modeling and simulation is to the whole digital transformation, the digital trinity. So Will and I have talked a number of times about Middle Georgia being the hub for the digital trinity. We already have the hub for modeling and simulation in Central Florida. Here's a way for our communities to come together and work closely to advance this technology and have it happen right here in the Southeast. As part of our activity, it's important to have this network across the country of universities that we can tap into, because these students are so bright. You would be amazed at what they're capable of building, and the reach back they have to the faculty to make sure that they're using the latest technologies and what they're proposing would actually be able to be built and fielded. So we created this network, and what I noticed when I came in is there wasn't a lot of diversity. So we added FAMU, Florida A&M University, HBCU. You might know that the University of Central Florida, one of the largest universities in the country, is a Hispanic Serving Institute. And so for the last year, I have been working on NDA 222 that came from Senator Ossoff's office and Senator Scott's office on broadening the number of universities that are HBCUs in the INSEN network, and we have achieved that, I'm happy to say. And also our Florida High-Tech Corridor, which includes the whole Central Florida area, University of South Florida, Central Florida, and University of Florida, has more patents than any other region in the country. So there's lots of opportunity here in our modeling and simulation community to contribute and broaden all the capability, not only in defense, but because of defense. And we're taking it to medical, to the whole entertainment industry, to oil and gas, manufacturing, all of those industries that have been built up because of modeling and simulation in defense are now advancing so quickly and so fast that we can bring those commercial technologies and solutions back into the Department of Defense. Will mention digital twin. Disney has really advanced everything they're doing in digital twin. Billions of bytes of data processed every hour. And it's not just each ride, it's the rides that work together, it's the whole transportation system, it's the customers, everything that's going on in Disney. They have a digital twin so that they can quickly improve, do predictive maintenance, cut costs, and increase the experiences down to the individual level for their customers. So this is our network across the country. You can see the locations of DIU and of Ensign. And then we have this new on-ramp hub, and I'll talk about that in a minute, that also is starting in these 5 locations. These on-ramp hubs create an opportunity that's off base where the venture community can come together and demonstrate and show their capabilities, commercial, built for defense, either way, dual use, to the Department of Defense. They can come off base and see this capability. In addition, we have a lot of opportunities to work with our students that can show what their capabilities are and get information about how to start a company, help with getting the venture capitalists there or getting the government funding abilities there. So this is a way to bring all of these communities together: defense, academia, and the venture communities for national security. So I wanted to give you an example. This is an example of one of these on-ramp hubs that is not built by Ensign. This exists. It's been in existence for 3 years, and it's called Tech Grove, right there in Central Florida, in the University of Central Florida Research Park. It's a partnership intermediary agreement between the Navy and the University of Central Florida. But if you look along the bottom there, you'll see that these are all the organizations that are involved in Team Orlando, and it's every service that and DoD organization that come together in one spot. I mean, the advantage of this is that we can work with all of these organizations together, and this is where we're specializing in the Central Florida area. Okay, this is where all the modeling and simulation occurs. We can talk to each of those services, those Team Orlando members, the CTOs, about their problems and challenges, and we can compare them to see. So the Army might have a problem that the Navy has and the Air Force has. Think about what Will's talking about, digital transformation. If we can create a common solution that could then be domain-specific, enhanced, then we can really advance what we're doing, spending less money and getting more out of it. So there are tech bridges across the country that the Navy's put together, and this is an example of one that I wanted to show you. So if you look at all of that, you can see why we have such an interest from not only the services, but their interest at the university. The Department of Defense problems that we put into those classes are the favored problems. They really enjoy working with the military. And think about it, these students probably had no idea about all the really cool problems that they can be working on until they actually are face-to-face and working with many of these soldiers. And they are learning they don't have to put in a uniform to work for the Department of Defense and give back. So there's a lot of excitement. We have a lot of Department of Defense families in the area, and they're very excited that they can be part of what their heritage is all about. So what are we trying to do with these hubs? We're going to increase the defense industry base. I love this. It frustrates me no end when our top talent goes to Silicon Valley to work on social media. I'd much rather them stay here and work with us on solving our defense problems. We're focused on tech transfer. Many of these companies are commercial companies. They had no idea, but our economic development people are bringing them to us, and we're teaching them how to market to the Department of Defense. It's not easy. It's a whole different mechanism and business development. And then we also find solutions. So this is what we do. We get everyone together on a regular basis, and this is to drive faster innovation using our modeling and simulation. So, give you an example of the kind of things that go on in these hubs. You know, we have webinars, they call them juice bars, that gets everyone excited. The defense comes in, talks about their problem. We have prize challenges. Ensign also runs prize challenges where individuals or companies can compete to show the solution to a problem and get the interest going. We do a lot of hub zone showcases. And here's an example of a prize challenge. So this is something that what we're trying to do in this particular prize challenge is figure out how to get training, education to the warfighter faster. And how do you do that using artificial intelligence? So how can we have ready large language models develop quality task analysis and generate them much quicker than the old technology ways that we were using for instructional design. Next slide. Here's a way that they connect. You can find them on the website. Next slide. And then I'll wrap it up by saying, here's just some numbers I'll throw out. They're a couple of years old now, but this is the kind of interactions that we have and the accomplishments that we have with Ensign in this type of activity. So I'm looking forward to the panel and answering any of your questions while we're there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the last of our formal presentations will be by Mr. Josh Altman. Josh currently serves as the National Security Advisor to U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff. He advises the Senator on all issues pertaining to defense, foreign affairs, homeland security, and veterans affairs. Before joining Senator Ossoff's office, he earned a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. While he was there, he served as a research assistant to Belfer Center Senior Fellow and former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford. And he also acted as a course assistant, so is that a fancy name for teaching assistant? To Belfer Center Director and former Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter. Additionally, Josh served for 5 years as an infantry officer in the U.S. Army. He has deployed to Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division. He also earned bachelor's degrees in economics from the George Washington, from GWU. With that, Josh, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I first want to thank, on behalf of myself and Senator Ossoff, 21st Century Partnership, particularly General Kubinec, Dan Rhodes, Bob Herman, Lori Freeman, and their entire team. They are truly indispensable partners in our efforts to serve Middle Georgia, Robins Air Force Base, this entire region. One of the great parts about my job is I get to go to every military installation in this state, and I can vouch for the value and the importance of having an organization and having leaders like the folks at 21st Century Partnership to partner with the congressional delegation so that we are aware of what is going on in our communities, what our communities need, what our bases need, and I can't thank them enough for their leadership. Thank you to Senator Nunn, thank you to the Nunn School, all those who made this event possible, thank you to the staff who set this up, it looks fantastic, and of course to the museum for hosting. I really believe that Georgia can be the hub for defense innovation activity in the United States. We have all of the actors, we have all of the people, we have all of the missions, and perhaps more to come. To truly be at the cutting edge of innovation. Our educational institutions, our workforce, those military equities, they are the makings of an ecosystem that can drive our national security forward.
It's I believe it deep in my bones, and it's what I think about every single day in my work with Senator Ossoff. And an event like this is exactly what needs to be happening, not only here in Middle Georgia, but throughout the state. And I hope this serves as a model for other similar events throughout the state, so that we can bring together academia, the private sector, the military, and of course our other community organizations to meet our national security challenges. The theme of today's forum, innovating, connecting generations, has particular meaning to me. I began my career first as a mathematics teacher, a high school math teacher in Florida, actually. So shout out to Bev and her Florida connections. And I was working to prepare young people in the hopes that they would have access to the critical and promising STEM careers of the future. Then as an Army infantry officer, I saw at the tactical level how important it is that we see our national security challenges clearly and we are prepared to meet them with creativity and skill. These experiences have led me to believe that connecting workforce development efforts, STEM education, and national security is not only wise policymaking, but also a strategic necessity. In my current role, I have the privilege of helping Senator Ossoff with his highest priorities. First, the safety and security of the American people, and then the interests and concerns of those who hired us to do this job, the people of Georgia. Our efforts to support defense innovation are well aligned with these priorities. I'd like to take my time today to discuss what I see as Congress's role in supporting innovation activity and the workforce of the future, as well as some of the work we have been doing to drive those missions forward. I first want to start, though, with a disclaimer. It'd be presumptuous of me to say that I represent all of Congress and I can speak for all of Congress, and I certainly wouldn't want to carry that burden. But in my 2.5 years with Senator Ossoff, I'd like to share some of my reflections. So the late and truly great Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, without whom I would very much not be standing before you today, once described Congress in his memoir as a board of directors with 535 members. And as you surely have noticed, we seem to have very much achieved approximately that level of efficiency in how we do things. But as frustrating as the politics and the process can be, I truly believe that the Senate and the Congress play two vital roles that, when done right, can ensure we are meeting the defense innovation challenges of our time. The first is the role of an enabler. Innovation happens out here, out in the world, in our state, in places like Middle Georgia, among private and public sector actors. It's crucial that Congress work to achieve a resource, legal, regulatory, and discursive environment which enables this activity to thrive. The most obvious way we do that, of course, usually not on time, is through federal funding. Marshaling vast resources effectively is no easy task, but it is the most direct means by which we can define priorities and enable positive action, enable innovative activity. In the innovation space, this can mean funding the education and workforce developments necessary for the future, as well as funding investments in basic research and prototyping. And more recently, we've seen federal funding brought to bear to begin to ensure that emerging and commercial technologies can flourish and be applied to urgent national security challenges. Of course, we also create an authorization environment that can, if done right, enable innovation to succeed. We define the orientation and extent of executive branch authorities to act and spend. And in the innovation space, this is particularly important, as it can determine whether we are facilitating or inhibiting the type of dynamic innovation we need to meet the challenges of our time. However, those two powers, to fund and to authorize, are really hard to do. Making laws is hard work. So I'd like to suggest also perhaps the less obvious means by which Congress can enable innovators that doesn't take passing a law or passing a funding bill. We also have a unique ability to convene government officials, experts, the private sector in and across our states to generate attention and create connections where none existed before. We can encourage constituents and government officials to consider opportunities and heed risks. And we can seek to shape the public narrative to generate momentum for innovative ideas that benefit the American people. All of these actions make up a toolkit with which Congress can enable the critical work of our educators, innovators, and national security professionals. But of course, Congress also has the duty to oversee. We are when acting responsibly, the stewards of taxpayer investments and advocates for the interests and concerns of those we represent. We have a serious obligation to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely and as intended, and to advocate for the specific needs of our constituents. Even as we seek to unleash innovation, we are obligated to remain vigilant to fraud and abuse. Through our oversight work, we can receive briefings, we can hold hearings, we can manage constituent casework, and field the request for information necessary to inform wise legislative action and funding decisions, and to ensure our constituents are treated fairly and served well by their government. And oversight can be particularly challenging in the innovation space. Almost by definition, the process of innovating is fast-paced, dynamic, and involves some degree of failure to inform future success. Truly effective oversight work requires persistent, candid communication between Congress and the executive, acknowledging costs and benefits, opportunities, and risks. Of course, congressional oversight can also serve as its own enabling effect, drawing attention and focus from the bureaucracy on matters pressing to our constituents and to our national security. The problems we seek to solve are hard, the world is complex, but when informed by our constituents' concerns, the opportunities that exist in our state, thoughtful expertise, effective oversight can help cut through the noise and competing priorities to achieve more effective results from our government. Senator Ossoff has sought to bring all of these tools to bear in support of the ongoing and potential innovation activity here in Middle Georgia and across the state. And I want to provide a few examples. In 2022, he teamed up with Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher and successfully secured significant funding increases for the Defense Innovation Unit, National Security Innovation Network, and National Security Innovation Capital to enhance the adoption of innovative commercial technology to meet national security challenges and expand opportunities and careers solving cutting-edge problems. This year, we redoubled that effort, and the FY24 request for additional resources now includes a dozen bipartisan members of both the Senate and the House. He also teamed up, as Bev mentioned, with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina to pass a version of the HBCU National Security Innovation Act, which became Section 222 of the FY23 NDAA, to encourage greater engagement between Ensign and the nation's HBCUs and minority-serving institutions. This effort, which as mentioned is currently being implemented in partnership with Bev and her team, will result in greater access to the talent our nation needs to address pressing national security challenges and expose students to promising careers in STEM and entrepreneurship. Senator Ossoff also worked with Republican Senators Mike Rounds and Tom Tillis to pass the Cybersecurity Opportunity Act to establish federal grants to establish and expand cybersecurity education programs at HBCUs and MSIs, which will help generate the dynamic cyber workforce of the future. But of course, most importantly, Senator Ossoff and our team have sought to focus the federal government's attention and resources on the vital and innovative equities we have here in Georgia. We have sought to shape the decision environment around and oversee the implementation of not only new missions here at Robins Air Force Base, including cutting-edge advanced battle management system capabilities, but also the recent choice to bring F-35s to Moody Air Force Base, the continued growth of the Cyber Center of Excellence at Fort Eisenhower, the arrival of the next generation of strategic deterrence at Kings Bay, the future of maneuver warfare at Fort Moore, and innovative service level member initiatives like the Marne Innovation Center at Fort Stewart, and similar priorities across the state. And here at the center of all this Georgia activity, not only geographically, is Robins Air Force Base and the greater Middle Georgia community, where engaged leaders, world-class innovative activity, and vital mission sets are driving our national security forward and strengthening our posture around the world. What really makes this place special, though, and this is my conclusion into what I assess to be Congress's most important function, and I think the theme of this event reinforces, is that for all the cutting-edge technology and capabilities that this work involves, the most important ingredient is a truly dynamic, innovative defense, defense innovation ecosystem are the people that do the work. Ensuring that those working on these issues are supported and well represented, and that the brilliant young people who are the key to solving tomorrow's challenges have access to education and opportunities they deserve is among our highest callings. and it is ultimately what Congress's critical role is, ensuring the voice, talents, efforts of the people that we represent are included in the vital decisions and work to be done. It's a pleasure to serve you in the Senate, and I very much look forward to the discussion.
He's already on his way up. I'm here to introduce my mentor and friend, the Honorable Bob McMahon.
If your head isn't about to explode, it should be. What you've heard over the last hour to hour and a half has been absolutely phenomenal. Let me add a little bit of upfront clarity, and I'm the only thing between you and a break, so I will be quick with my comments. First, as you go back to our focus today has been on innovation, connecting generations, and there's been a very subtle message. Senator Nunn and I were the two with the ties on. We're part of that older generation, and then the remainder of the team that you've heard from, open collar, that's that younger generation. I was just excited that Will Roper didn't have his hoodie on, which is how I normally saw him in the Pentagon in those days, both in DIU and then in the Air Force. So there is a very subtle message there, but there's a very distinct message there as well in thinking about some of the challenges that we face in terms of generations and how we face what we do. I've listened intently, and my comments will only scratch the surface of what you've heard so far this morning. General Eberlan started off with a comment about innovation is the one thing that will allow us to succeed in great power competition. And it's a term that we continue to hear throughout the morning, this concept of innovation. Dr. Roper talked about the DoD needs to be the first adopter of some of the technologies that we no longer generate internally within the Department of Defense, but can leverage from the commercial industry within the United States. He went on to talk about the fact that data is the most important commodity that we have, and referenced that to the point that we need to get ready to win wars with software and be able to do that much more rapidly, create that capability much more rapidly than the ice ages we measure creation of our hardware in at the current time. He finished by talking about the term digitize, and I put an exclamation point there. We need to think differently. We need to digitize what we do. Then most importantly, though, once digitized, we need to use that digitization. And he talked in great length about modeling and simulation, digital twins, and the ability to leverage much more rapidly that which we've taken time to do in creating a real model. Dr. Seay got up and talked about how we might do that and what that facilitation could be with the National Security Innovation Network. How do we get to where we need to be? How do we tie together the Department of Defense, the commercial sector, our academic institutions with those who can actually make something happen? And that tool already exists, and we already have it here in the Southeast. She talked at great length about what we have right now in terms of that capability, predominantly in Central Florida. Right behind that, Josh got up and talked about the fact that Georgia could be the hub for the nation in innovation. And it tied on perfectly to what Dr. Seay had just said. Why not Georgia? And I would offer to this audience, why not Middle Georgia? When you think about the academic institutions that array our community, whether it's Georgia Tech, whether it is Middle Georgia State University, Mercer University, Fort Valley State, which gives us the diversity that we need in that team of different universities and academic. And then also Middle Georgia Technical College and what it provides. Our technical research centers, both GTRI and MERC, that capability, and then you tie that together with the fact that we are the state center for educating veterans, and you tie that together with the effort already underway in this community, both in this museum as well as in the community in terms of STEM education and the ability to grow that next generation and the generation after that with the skills and abilities to do the things that we need to do. It's a perfect storm for the potential of where we as a community, we as a region, we as a state, we as a nation need to go. And so I'll provide you a couple of questions to think about as we go to break. How can we connect all of these elements together? Whether it is the requirement, whether it is the academics, whether it is the commercial sector, whether it is those that are going through STEM education, to create an incubator that creates solutions that will feed our national defense. How do we evolve those that are already in place, question 2, to give them the understanding and the experience and the knowledge and the awareness of what digitization means and how we apply it in the environment of where we're headed? And then finally, how do we leverage our leadership in Washington to help facilitate number 1 and number 2? As Josh pointed out, the role is to authorize, to appropriate, to provide both oversight and to convene when appropriate. How do we leverage that capability to help us facilitate the things that we need to do? Lots of opportunity, and most importantly, we now get to hear from you after a 10-minute break. Please enjoy and be back in your seats in about 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Before we get started, would y'all please join me in giving a nice applause to our panelists and just thanking them for what they've already shared with us. And what I'm looking forward to doing is just delving a little bit deeper into some of the topics that they touched upon in their presentations. So the first question I have is actually an audience question, and this one is from Secretary Nunn. And so I wanted to ask his question first because I know he has a timeline where he may have to leave before the forum ends. So I want to give him an opportunity to hear our panelists address his question. So the question is this: can we defend our digitization against cyber bad guys and adversaries who hack our systems? And so really what he's wanting to do, he wants you to just address the fact that when we move towards the digital world, digitization, we're going to have to defend that from hackers. And where are we as far as our ability to be able to do that? And what's the priority of that over developing the systems? So you can develop the systems from an offensive standpoint, but what's the priority to defend those systems as well?
We're all looking at you.
All right. I don't know what you do when someone hands you a microphone after a question. I think it's being drafted in a panel. I have a lot of hope on digital security, including cyber security, because but it comes with a caution, and I'll make sure both are clearly understood. You know, we all, most of us here went through the whole internet age where it was first just kind of happening amongst people who were computer people, and then business caught up and eventually wanted to start using it for commerce. And we realized, oh, this is inherently not secure. Right now, it's so clear that we needed technologies like RSA encryption, the little padlock thing that we're all now familiar with, all of that had to be created after the fact to try to go backwards and make the internet more secure. And it's kept going. We have two-factor authentication. You may have one of those little fobs that you stick into your computer. So now you have a physical thing that's associated with you. You have a username, you have a password. So the good news is the industry has seen that there's good business in having security, and it's really bad business to not be secure. With the movement to architectures that are zero trust, if you've heard that term, it basically presumes no one is a good person, no use is a good use. It's monitoring and checking all of the time. It has tremendous potential for us to make our lives more secure. And there are other technologies you may have heard of, like containerization or Kubernetes, that can localize and isolate code for intended purposes and not allow it for purposes it's not intended for. What all this should tell you is this sounds great that we can be exceptionally digital, exceptionally connected, and exceptionally secure, but only if we design for it and only if we take the time to do it. Like, who here has two-factor authentication on your phone? You log into your email. Do you have to do a text? Who has one of the little key things, the little fobs that you have to stick in occasionally and say, oh yes, it's me? These are the things that we either do and we become exceptionally secure because we have multiple levels of security and difficult to compromise them are, or we don't. I think eventually this will be a national security imperative. I think you can argue it is now, but it's also just good business and just good for living life and feeling like we're confident about things. So what should we do practically is, be obviously very literate and current in what's the best security practices, practice what we preach, do them, and tolerate the minor inconveniences that they put in place across your system, knowing that you can sleep better at night, not having your information or our nation's available for compromise.
So I agree. It's always easier to build it in than to bolt it on later. But I would also say that the ability to have a digital twin of something that exists today will tell you how secure whatever you already have can be. And remember when we first started working on cybersecurity, it was all about IT. And nobody was paying attention to OT, the operational, the control systems, because they weren't built to be secure. They were built to be reliable, right? And then we started connecting our IT systems to our OT systems to become more efficient of operating them. And all of a sudden we had pathways back and forth. And those hardware systems can become weapons. Certainly weren't intended to be that, but they can certainly take down the grid. They can take down your water supply. So again, I think that going into this digitization world will not only allow us to build better from the scratch, more secure systems, but it will also help us to secure the systems that we already have.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that question?
There we go. I just add two things sort of under the framework that I laid out for Congress's work as in the enabling sense. I think that the human piece of this is so important. The workforce piece, having knowledgeable, expert engineers and cybersecurity professionals who are doing the designing and then the implementation in particular, particularly as you move down below the federal level where institutions, organizations become more resource constrained, being able to sustain the implementation of cybersecurity best practices, to be able to update your software, to be able to update your hardware, and stay ahead of the curve as best as possible. And then on the oversight piece, I know that when we are briefed or made aware of new and exquisite technologies, whether they're national security related or otherwise, we're always asking the question of resilience. Is yes, that sounds nice, but in a worst case scenario, under a cyber threat or the other threats to digital capabilities that exist out there. Think EW in the military sense. Resilience is always top of mind. It's something that we're pushing the executive to be considering as we do our oversight work.
There's also a practical side to this. For many of us in this room, since you were children, there was always a seatbelt in your car. And yet there are those who are a lot older still won't wear a seatbelt. Well, when we talk about two-factor validation or authorization, we have to educate why that's important. And it isn't just for the experts, but everyone that somehow touches digital data has the ability to impact the security of that data by not doing what they need to do. And so much like we have with a variety of different issues to include wearing seatbelts, drinking and driving, you pick the subject, part of this is digital security. And it's got to be a national effort to educate everyone in this country of why that's important and to drive the behavior. And so we can do everything we want to. You can take the horse water, but you can't make them drink unless you hold their head underwater until they drown. We don't want to have to get to that. We want to make it a logical thing for people to do. So that has to be an integral part of this.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator Nunn, for that question. So really your answer and your response to that question kind of leads into the second question, because one of the things that we want to know is, as we talk about the different technologies that are out there, the latest technology, the impact that they'll have on developing new technology, based upon what I'm hearing from you all, is we have to make sure that part of the design principles for the new technology includes the defense of those technologies, so that you have to do that at the design level. You have to do that right up front. So thinking of that in future technologies, especially as it relates to the Department of Defense, and Dr. Roper, I'll initially address this question to you. How is the Department of Defense behind as it relates to the infrastructure required to use software for digital engineering?
Let me check the time here. Infrastructure is really hard to get people excited about in government, and we need to get excited about it. To give you a sense about where the Air Force was when I joined the team in 2018, we didn't have a cloud. We're just getting cloud capability. It was still mistrusted for security. It didn't know what we would do with it other than maybe email it. We didn't have coding. We didn't have any software coders. We didn't even know if anyone knew how to code in the Air Force. We had no idea what our computer literacy rate was. We certainly had no data analytics, no artificial intelligence. And that's just 5 years ago, right? So why didn't we have those things? Is that, well, there is expense to go in it. We could buy one more airplane, or we could invest in information technology. So you have to be able to win that fight. And then secondly, you've got to have the technical know-how to take commercially available technologies for IT and get the best security out of them for the government. We're not going to build IT better than Amazon, Microsoft, Google have. We're not going to build better cloud technology. We're not going to build anything like containerization. Let me give you an example. This is an example of a technology that sounds obscure, right? Many have people heard of containerization or Kubernetes? Yeah, it's stuff like that, right? Well, I mean, it's not in the news, but within tech circles, that's how Google works today. It's like 400 million containers that work together. Now, let me take you down I'm going to get to these airplanes around us. You may think, wow, we are in left field. So Google, seeing that the Internet of Things was moving more and more to the edge, realized we have a problem. The software that we run in our cloud, we don't know if it's going to run on your phone, your device, the way we want it to. We got to fix this. So they created a technology, eventually open sourced it, called Kubernetes, that ensures that software at the edge runs exactly the same way it does in the cloud. If you think about these airplanes around us, that's the problem we have in the military. How do we get software on these jets and ensure they don't crash? That problem was solved. And I joined it you just have to use it. But it's an example of why the military is behind. No one knew that in the Air Force. No one knew we ought to go build a cloud with a platform that implements containerization and the orchestration of them called Kubernetes so that we can develop code really fast with coders and push it to a jet without a months-long certification process in between. So I highlight that as an example of that's the level of knowledge, of technical education that we must demand of our government leaders. We cannot let them buy any more talking about high-level concepts, high-level policies, and say that's okay. If you are leading any major company today, you cannot lead it without understanding technology. And if you don't have that trusted person on your team that can tell you at great detail how to make good choices about your company, the board of directors will fire you and get someone who can. We should do the same thing in government, and if we did, what I expect is they would say, we've got to invest more in infrastructure before we do it on the things that are created out of that infrastructure. And that way we're creating a better engine of change, not just things that are in the real world. It's a long answer with a very specific example of that's what's holding back the military. Too many high-level things.
Dr. Roper, just a follow-on question, real quick on that. We've talked about the importance and the role that the private sector plays. What are the opportunities for the private sector to be able to join forces with the Department of Defense and help move them forward?
The opportunities are immense because we live in a world where data is the most valuable thing. And I mentioned the military should be and is typically the first adopter of new tech that is too risky for the rest of the world. The data we produce is so valuable, more valuable than any money we would spend with industry. So we mentioned digital twins today. That's coming soon to almost everything you do. Expect maybe over the next 5 years, this is going to become something that impacts more and more of your life. Well, there's going to be this thing that we've got to do as a society, which is decide when will we trust a digital twin and algorithms running in it. Right now, who would be okay with an AI algorithm having access to your medical data, prescribing medicines for you that no human doctor looks at? Who would be okay with that today? Well, you're right for that. We're not quite ready for that. But could you imagine the U.S. military having that capability available so that there's no medic available on the battlefield? You are getting the algorithm's best predictions so that someone is not trained is making a good call? Yes. What would that use case do? Start producing data. What would we do with that data? Determine how much can we trust this technology. What would private enterprise do? They would take that data and say, how can we make it better? Cycle, and now you've created a new industry here. Just repeat that 100 times over, and we'll be leading the next generation of the technical economy. That's what frustrates me about the government, is that it doesn't see those opportunities.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? All right, so what I want to do, I want to integrate a question from the audience in this, and I think this question probably comes from someone that's out there in the private sector. So can you comment on ways that we in industry can better move quickly to collaborate with our international partners to bring best-in-breed technology to the U.S. warfighter?
I take a crack at that. Well, one thing that can be done is you can leverage your congressional representation. That's what we are. We exist to represent the specific interests of, in the case of my boss, a state, but whether in the House, a district, of course, Civics 101. We are here to help our constituents, among other things, navigate the federal bureaucracy. And part of that is connecting opportunities from private sector stakeholders in our state to opportunities in the federal government. It doesn't mean putting fingers on scales or anything of that sort. It's just about navigating what can be a daunting bureaucracy when you first see it. But a congressional office, in some ways, is the door to that bureaucracy in the sense that we're there to serve you as a constituent, and make you aware and help you understand what opportunities exist, how you speak to agencies, how you connect with agencies, what opportunities exist for things like grant funding and other opportunities. And so I always encourage, whether you're a veteran seeking assistance with your benefits or someone seeking to bring a bespoke capability to the Department of Defense, that your congressional, or in my case, your Senate representation is a great first step. So some advice you can use.
I think to understand what you need to do is to understand what some of the limitations are today and what some of the barriers are when you look at our acquisition core today. I would tell you three things. One, there's an experiential or generational issue, depending upon how you want to define it. Secondly, there's a mass issue. And third, there's a risk issue. When I talk about experiential, we have a large proportion of our current workforce, and Dr. Roper alluded to this, that don't understand the conversation that we're having today. They might be engineers, they may be acquirers, they could be contracting officers, but within the structure, don't have a firm understanding of what this conversation really is about. And so it's important that there are those out there that can bring that information to them. The challenge gets to the second point, and that is mass. There are 6,253,826 different organizations out there who believe they're experts in digitization and can use AI, machine learning, digital twins, and predictive analytics in a sentence, mostly effectively, that will confuse the living hell out of an acquisition official today when they look at the 200 people lined out their door to give them a story about it. And so it's a mass issue of who do I listen to, who really knows what they're talking about. And then the final point is the risk issue. There is not an acquisition official in the Department of Defense today that wants to be on the front page of the Washington Post. Zero. Because that's not a good thing. And so we have created an environment today that we do something, we have a checker, then we have a checker that checks the checker, and then we have a checker that checks the checker who checks the checker. And this goes on throughout this so that we can work towards zero risk. Zero risk means it takes an ice age to get anything to happen, no matter how innovative the idea is. So what we've got to do internal to the department is figure out how we overcome this. How do we create a clearinghouse for those that really understand digitization, understands the digital environment, that can be available to our acquisition officials, whether engineers, acquirers, contracting officials, that are, we've already vetted these folks, they know what they're talking about, and almost I can pick one over here, but can much more rapidly get to where we need to do. We also need our friends' help from Congress to reduce the threat of risk. And whether it's the GAO or someone trying to take something to the front page of the Washington Post, we've got to alter the environment that people are willing to take risks to be able to get to where we need to be. If we don't do those two things, as good as this is, as meaningful as it is, as necessary it is, it's not going to take place in a timely environment.
So also, I mentioned prize challenges. So we are collaborating with our international partners to collectively address gaps and look for the innovators that have solutions. So you might want to keep an eye out on a regular basis. DIU is putting out these types of challenges. And so the winners of those challenges are a way to fast track to acquisitions. So that's another option for improving how we can get things into our warfighters' hands faster.
So for the audience member who had the question about addressing the acquisition process and the risks associated with that, I'm going to count that question answered. So very good. Okay. Secretary McMahon, next question to you initially. So we talk about the different changes that are needed within the Department of Defense. What changes are needed quickly, like rapidly, to best leverage the new technologies that Dr. Roper has discussed? And is this a policy, personnel, or training problem, or a combination of all of the above, or something else?
As I just alluded to, I think it's a cultural issue. And what we've got to be able to do is deal with those three issues of whether it is generational or experiential. How do we increase that if you don't have the ability to train somebody, infuse new technology? You know, I joked earlier about the hoodies. You'd walk into a meeting and there would be three guys or gals in hoodies that you knew were from DIU, that knew what they were talking about because they think differently, and they were the ones that we collectively listened to because they had the experience and understanding of the issues at a level that no one else in the room had. And so how do we infuse that kind of experience? And if we can't, how do we leverage the private sector to do that, but understand who really understands the private sector, and how do we infuse that? That goes back to this idea of a clearinghouse. How do we take those people, make them available, make sure that we know how to do it? Dr. Seay talked about an alternate method is how do we tie everyone together through the National Security Innovation Network than to push solutions. That there's some level of vetting because we're all overwhelming our acquisition community in ways that they don't understand, don't know who to trust, because everyone can use all the appropriate acronyms in a sentence, even though they may not know what they're talking about. And so we have got to figure out how we pre-vet folks in a way that make that available, and an organization's purpose is to pre-vet so that when an acquirer goes, they know that these folks know what they're talking about, can facilitate and expedite the process in a way that we haven't been able to do up to this point.
Okay. Thank you. So the more I listen to you all, and Mr. Altman, this next question will be initially addressed to you, the more I'm understanding, especially as you just talked about the culture issue, that it's an issue that has to be addressed not just with the Department of Defense, but also in the private sector itself. So, Mr. Altman, my question for you is, what is needed from Congress to achieve progress in the technological innovation space that we're talking about to keep it moving forward for both the public and the private sectors? And then what tools does Congress bring to bear to drive innovation and change?
Well, the first thing, frankly, is we have to fund our government on time. I go to, like I said, every military installation in this state, and I ask them what they need. Of course, that's my first question. That's why I'm there. I want to know what I can do to help them, what Senator Ossoff can do to help them. And almost every time, one of the first, either the first or the second thing is no more CRs, and certainly no shutdowns. Unfortunately, I and my member individually cannot do that alone, right? We have very limited control over that, but having predictability in the things we're already planning on investing in, not to mention the things we need to down the line, is holding us back, right? The unpredictability of that, our inability to consistently fund these investments and set the groundwork for the things that need to come. But within that context, I think there are still things that we can do. And part of that comes down to oversight, which is I'm certainly no acquisitions expert, but I see when I interact with our acquisition system and I ask the questions about why we're spending money on this program versus another, there is a risk aversion that leads to, it holds back innovation. The way the system is set up seems to, and Dr. Roper can certainly speak more particular to this than I can, but seems to hold back the fear of failure seems to hold back our ability to spend money efficiently, and when we fail, correct it and find the capability another way. And I'm not sure yet how to fix that, but I think in our oversight work in Congress and how we choose to fund things, we can do a better job of communicating with the executive branch about how we should view the innovation, the iterative process of innovation, a willingness to fail in a productive way is one thing I would say. And then finally, Congress can really empower the perhaps non-defense capabilities as well. I bring up workforce and education as an important point here. While the important work of the DoD and the defense stakeholders is ongoing, Congress can be helping states and localities invest in the types of education systems, workforce development systems, help universities and other institutions do the same so that we have the human capital necessary to drive innovation forward and to bring us into the future. Over.
All right, thank you. And Ms. Seay, this next question would be addressed to you. When we think about the theme of our conference, innovation, connecting generations, what I'd like to ask you is, as it relates to connecting the new generation into this workforce space and these new systems, we need to, sounds like just from what I've heard today, we need to move faster rather than slower because of the rate of change that we're seeing as it relates to technology. So how do we shift the world, and what career opportunities are available for students to embrace this new direction?
Well, I'd start with the universities because I think a lot of people will agree the whole curriculum needs a second look, especially with digitization. And this isn't just about STEM careers, right? You mentioned it's social. So we have to make sure that all of our students in all of our fields and disciplines understand this technology and how to use it. You don't have to build technology in order to know how to use it, right? How many of us really know how that phone's put together? But we have no problem using all the apps as they come out. And I think that's really where we're behind. I wanted to use an example of that you all recognize, the whole concept of multi-capable airmen, right? And I was talking to one of my mission partners who gave me a slide from the Will Roper days and said, I want to implement this. And it was talking about the AI-enabled multi-capable airman who's in some remote area with his computing on the edge. And let's say they are a C-130 maintainer, and then an F-16 flies in with a need for a repair. How's that repair going to happen? So can AI find it on the edge and say, would this help you understand better what you need to do? And if not, is that remote location connected to the DoD cloud? Can it be found there? If not, can you go? So we have students working on that problem. Well, what about the AI-enabled, multi-capable student that becomes the AI-enabled, multi-capable workforce, right? And it's important that we understand how all this digitization and AI is going to impact all our social services. I mean, we're creating, I know in Orlando we are, a digital twin of the city, you know? And that's to find out what impacts are going to happen. And it's not just about, you know, driverless cars and everything else, but it's social services and how we're all going to work with each other and work with other communities. So I feel it has to start at the university, which means it has to start with the faculty, right? We have shared governments. That means that the faculty is deciding what's in the curriculum. They have got to embrace this. And I pushed this for a while and got no interest until ChatGPT came along. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness, this is affecting the writing class. Okay, it's going to get a lot more complicated in ChatGPT. So the administrators of the university have got to embrace the digital twin of the university. They're running cities. right? And then the boards of these universities, those are usually made of industry personnel and people from the political environment. And so they need to understand how to bring what they're seeing in their areas, in their workplace, to the university so they get the workforce that they need. So everyone's going to have to figure this out, work together, and go faster, faster, faster.
All right, thank you. So as we think about, again, the students, I mean, educating the students, they're the human capital. They're the ones that we want to educate and train to do this. As we all know, coming out of a prolonged global pandemic, there was a hit as far as students matriculating in college during that time. And there's some recent data that was released back in July of this year by assessment provider Northwest Evaluation Association. And Secretary McMahon, I'll initially address this question to you, but the data suggests that students aren't rebounding from the ground that was lost during the pandemic, specifically in two areas, in reading and in math. So how would you recommend that we interrupt this compounding debt and accelerate student learning so that they do show up at the university so that we can do what Ms. Seay just said?
So if you go look at the data as I remember it, we're about a half a school year behind across the nation in both reading and math. That's interesting as a nationwide number, but the reality is it has to be a local discussion. And not only does it have to be in the local school district, it has to be almost school by school. Because I think if you go back and look at the study as well, it will talk to you about the fact that there are some at-risk sectors of students that are in particular especially affected. So if I have a school that is predominantly lower income, it may not be 6 months, it may be a full year. The reality is I think we have to accept and understand what the data is telling us, and then at a local level, in our case at a county level, go down with the school system and understand school by school what those numbers really look like, and then have an individual plan of how we go address it. It may be that in fourth grade at school X, I'm not going to teach fourth grade math. I may be teaching third grade math for the first half of the year and then fourth grade math, because I've got to get people to where they need to be, because if I don't, and I start teaching fifth grade the next year, they still don't understand. So this is an education issue that isn't just for educators, it's for parents. It's for our political leadership across the board to have an appreciation and understanding of where each school is, and then what's our game plan school by school to explain it to the parents. It may be Saturday classes. It may be things that I've not even thought of yet, but we've got to approach it that way to bring that back up so that we can continue to accelerate the way that we have, at least in my opinion.
So we've had similar problems before the pandemic with community colleges producing students that are not junior ready to go into a four-year program. And so we've worked that problem in two ways. One, by creating a summer class, and it's amazing how much students can learn in a short period of time, be concentrated, particularly getting them ready for calculus, for example, and getting them ready and up to speed, and then they can perform as if they had always been at that four-year institution. We have the same challenges with students coming in from underrepresented areas. The high schools aren't teaching AP. They're not getting these students ready. Okay, so the problem is we don't have enough resources at the universities to create those programs that help accelerate those bright students who could perform if they only had that advantage. To me, this now is showing we have this problem at scale. And so how are we going to solve it at scale? And so that's at the university level. You can just take that down at each level. So it's going to require new programs. Second, I think that what we all learned was that online meant different things to different communities. And some students could do well online and many would not. But it also, what did you mean by online? Was the course really designed to be online? No, most of them were just, talking head only over the computer. So how do these students learn differently, and how are we going to use technology to help them learn differently, to help them catch up? And the answer isn't just AR, VR, or the new exciting thing, because people learn differently. And so I think it starts with the universities, because that's where a lot of the research and technology comes from that can then be supported with K through 12.
This is an area that I have a surprisingly personal connection. I have a young daughter, still 2.5, but I'm already starting to think about her education. And the world that I talked about being driven by technology as much as I expect it to be. When I look at the education that I was given, it seems increasingly less and less relevant to the future. I think if we started with a blank sheet of paper, we have no background, we didn't do reading, writing, arithmetic, we didn't go through like algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, I'd be surprised if any of these subjects made the cut. I think we would find ourselves looking at the mathematics of how computers work and realizing that's probably important, that statistics is important, that learning to code is likely more important than learning a foreign spoken language. Given the future of the world, foreign spoken languages can be very accurately translated by AI, and most people believe you'll have that babblefish in your ear one day. So I point this out, if we're really going to compete, so I'm thinking about it very personally in my family, but if we were really going to compete against China and we keep educating people for last century's jobs, or based on last century's education, while our competitors modernize, it will increasingly graduate students who will hit the ground, find that what they've learned is not operative in the companies they want to work for, and find that experience gap that keeps them from being hired quickly will continue to be an impediment. So I used to joke when I was asked, how will you know if the US is competing against China? And I would say it's jokingly, but I wasn't joking, that when education is overhauled for us to compete, I'll know that we're serious as a nation.
And keeping with that theme of education, especially in our universities, this is a question from the audience. And it says the most common response we hear of professors regarding generative AI is opposing and prohibiting their students from using generative AI. What initiatives are at Georgia Tech or at universities nationwide are actually utilizing and encouraging professors to embrace generative AI as a tool that will allow our students to excel in the technology of the future?
I think that's changing. I think they're starting to realize that this is actually a good tool used properly. Okay, it's a matter of trust, and it's a matter of using these tools in a trustworthy manner. So the professors that are teaching students how to use generative AI, and I do believe this is what's changing. The first reaction was, oh, no, this is going to ruin the whole system. Everybody's going to be cheating. But I do believe it's evolving, and I do believe that the faculty are getting a better understanding how to use it. Going back to my previous comment that it's all about the faculty in every discipline, and how are you going to use not just AI, but the whole digital spectrum of solutions that we will have available to us.
To me, it's unavoidable. So I do think it's changing. But what I also worry about is that we won't know how to navigate in society, especially the U.S., where AI is affecting everything, and to do that in a way where we are comfortable with the risk. One of the big issues that I see is that it's all called AI, and there are very different things happening right now. Like ChatGPT, which I'm going to guess for many people is the first time they were amazed by what AI can do. Like, I can ask it to write a term paper, and look, it's writing very well, better than I can write. But underneath the hood, the way that the mathematics works is trained on 100 trillion different training units called tokens. And all the algorithm's doing is taking every word you put in and predicting what the next word is. Doing that over and over again across a training set that is getting close to spanning the entire internet of information. It has all of the good and the bad, which is why there's a lot of bias in ChatGPT. And because it's got everything in it, and you're forcing it to predict your next word after word, and you force it to deal with constructs like we have in the human language. We've got declarative writing to poetry to sarcasm to humor. We want it to understand and work on all of that, right? So it will likely never converge to a kind of capability that you would let give you a critical medicine where if it's wrong, you could die. There'll be different kinds of AI that will be needed for that. It's an example of, if less we get government leaders who know how to work with the industries who already are driving this, and there's going to be no way to resist the change, then we're likely to find the change imposed on us as opposed to imposing on the change a direction that we would like to go. On the whole, I think it's going to make our world a much better place, where things are possible, where medicines can be designed, things can be personalized for you and still produced at a competitive price. All of these things that would have been impossible before digitization and AI are now possible. But they'll only become operative if they're guided by governments with incentives aligned with industry. And the only way that will happen is if we educate students so that they're ready to be the leaders in those industries. And that's where I worry. We don't really have a national strategy. We're not great at it as a society. We like to react to crises and to solve the problem. And if we wait to react, it will be far too late.
So, Josh, how do we? I'm pulling this, and how do we educate our Congress to do what Dr. Roper just said, and how do we? I was going to say control, but that's the wrong word. How do we facilitate ensuring that what Congress's action is beneficial and not restrictive to where we need to be?
So it's a really tough question, and we're grappling with it in real time. I think we're already behind, but I'm optimistic by a lot of things I've been seeing in the Senate itself, particularly with, over the last several months, there have been, Senator Schumer has hosted members-only briefings and then much wider open AI forums to better understand the issue. What I'm heartened by is there is a deliberate attempt now, even if it's already starting at a point behind, to educate decision makers within the Congress about what we're actually dealing with and what options are laid out before us. I cannot yet say what that option ought to be, but I can tell you that the conversations are happening, and there are thoughtful members, I think Senator Ossoff among them, who are having conversations with folks on the front lines of this, folks who are the innovators, who are developing the next generation of AI-enabled technology or the AI itself and machine learning itself, so that we can understand what are the, on the one end, existential risks to AI, and then the more immediate practical risks, and where should Congress be making policy along that spectrum responsibly. And so I don't have the answer yet about how we ought to be about questions around regulation and limitations or investments in this technology, or how the government adopts it, or how it restricts or encourages the world outside of government to adopt these technologies. But what I can say is there is a deliberate effort to educate our members about what AI is, to Dr. Roper's point, the differences between different AI and AI adjacent technologies, and then ultimately what is a prudent policymaking path.
I assume everyone's played with ChatGPT. Is that a fair assumption? Has it played with like an image generator, like a DALL-E 2 or Stable Diffusion or any of that? All right, here's to begin your journey into AI. A very fun, family-friendly activity is to do an AI art night. Like, go try to generate an image. Something like, pick your favorite artist or your favorite photographer and try to generate something that's in the vein. And what you'll find very instructive, I think, to kind of understand how this technology might affect society, is that when you're trying to get something inspired by or in the ballpark of, it's amazingly powerful because it's trained on a universe of information. It really helps you ideate, jumpstart things faster. But then try to transition from getting something that's in the ballpark of what you want to being in the precise seat that you want to be in, precisely what you want. And you'll find it hard to do that, really hard. And that will give you, I think, a real hands-on example of the challenge that we're going to have, that we can get from the universe to the ballpark, but so much of what we need to make society work is accuracy and precision, just getting from the ballpark to your seat. And that is the area, like how much risk are you willing to take, that we really do need governments to be educated and forward-leaning. I would recommend using the military as a first use case, because I think I'd rather fight with AI on my side than fight against it. And then as we get data, we can then inform where there are safe places to use it. And this technology will continue to evolve. Like, transformer-based models have been in the literature for decades. What's different, there's now enough data and computers are fast enough to train them. And now it's changed our lives. So we now have to get smart and catch up.
Thank you. So I got at least an hour more questions, but I got single digits minute left to ask them. So I want to hit the area that I've heard you all talk about during your presentation. And as we talk about the educational institutions at the various levels, making sure that what they provide is relevant to what's needed in the STEM fields in order for us to win this war on innovation. How important is focusing and integrating entrepreneurship and small business development into these efforts? And we'll start with you, Ms. Seay.
Yeah, I think it's absolute must, because whether you want to form a company or not, everything you learn through lean startup or any type of entrepreneurship is valuable in any type of problem solving. Entrepreneurship, that's what I was. I built a business within a company, but learning how to really understand the problem before you spend any resources on solving it. Make sure you have the right problem. These are the kind of skills, critical decision making. It's all part of entrepreneurism, but it's all part of problem solving. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that I think most employees work for a small business, right? And then with digitization coming on, digital twins, we're going to need a lot of models. We have a lot of simulation, but we don't have a lot of models in every field. I mean, they can even create human on a chip, the model of a heart, right? So I think there might be a gig economy opportunity to create models. So there's a lot of jobs and opportunities for our workforce for the future that don't exist today, right? 5 years ago, a lot of the jobs we have didn't exist. So being able as a university to instill entrepreneurism in the students of all different fields, I think is going to really help us make a difference and keep our economies growing.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions and just ask anyone on the panel to be able to address this. And we'll start with you, Mr. Altman, but again, open it up. National security is an all hands on deck affair, and the military is perhaps one of the best examples in a culture of different teams integrating for a singular purpose. So my question is two-part. Number one, what's the value proposition that we need to propose to high school and college graduates to encourage them to take their talents into the military? And number two, what route might we look back on 10 years from now and regret that we left out?
It's a very, very difficult question, and obviously it overlaps with the recruitment and retention concerns across the services that we're dealing with. And in some ways, I'm not a great person to answer this question because a very large percentage of our military, as I'm sure you all know, is made up of people whose parents or relatives were members of the military, and my father was a member of the military. It's why I had it in my mind when I finally decided to pull the trigger and go into uniform myself. So understanding how you draw people who don't have those first or second degree relatives and expose them to the opportunities and the sense of purpose and the sense of professionalism, not to mention some of the socioeconomic opportunities that can result from military service, is an enormously difficult challenge. And it takes focused leadership. But I also think that exposure can happen in unique ways, and I'll give an organization like Ensign a lot of credit here and why I am excited to work with them and to benefit students in our state, in that when you expose students to national security problems in a way that's not perhaps the traditional way you do, when you frame them as innovation problems, as entrepreneurship problems, maybe they don't all go into uniform, maybe most of them don't, but you expose a whole new group of students to the problems that are trying to be solved, the purpose of why our military needs to be capable, and the challenges it faces. And I think that there was opportunity there, not that Ensign ought to be a recruitment vehicle for the military, but you see what I'm saying, that there are these unique and novel ways that you can expose individuals from a population that perhaps doesn't have a mother or a father or a cousin or a brother or sister who served in the military, to the challenging but also in a lot of ways exciting problems to be solved that can give them the tools to not only be successful in the military context, but go off either as an alternative or after military service, continue applying those skills to the benefit of themselves, their family, and perhaps their country.
Thank you. And the final question, this might be, I'm glad you mentioned Ensign, because this might be a great way to wrap up the panel discussion. But what I'd like to know, and Ms. Seay, I'll address this to you, and Josh, I want you to think about this one as well. But my question is, would you share some success stories that have emerged through your work with Ensign? And were there common elements that were shared between organizations that have experienced success? And then, Mr. Altman, how has Congress supported the work specifically with Ensign and their efforts?
Well, thank you for that question, Joe. What's exciting to me is having our mission partners understand that their problem isn't going to get solved in 1 or 2 semesters. But because a lot of this that I'm working with is computing, but it can work for hardware too and prototyping, it's possible to take an engineering approach that allows you to build a little, deploy it, build some more, deploy it. So I have reservists that have been working on the problems reservists have with all the forms they have to fill out, all the different computer systems they have to access, all the different ways that they have to communicate, and get it all down to an iPhone or your phone of choice. And, so since 2020, we've been working on this challenge. So put it into the architecture class. They started it, and then we've taken it through iterations of different senior design classes, but then we also gave them, these students, the opportunity to be in our intern program over the summer. So they had 9 students working 40 hours a week and making this software commercial quality level so that they could convince the generals that this software needed to be deployed further. And then I talked them into overlapping classes so that the seniors that started in the summer and finished in the fall could also work with the seniors that started in the fall that finished in the spring. So we've got all of this going on, and it's continually, it started with 3 soldiers and reservists, and now it's going to go probably Army Reserve wide. So to me, that's incorporating all of our solutions. They can form a company out of it because the students will give up their IP. They're happy to do that, and it actually gets fielded and used and becomes better all the time. You could take that one example and you can propagate it to all the possibilities that we can do with just those students.
Fantastic, thank you. And Mr. Altman, just comments on Congress's work with the ensign.
Sure. So obviously the first thing comes down to funding, and we're really proud of the work we did with Teen Senator Ossoff and Congressman Gallagher. And it's a great example of, there's a lot of noise up here in the political sphere. Big issues that are important, don't get me wrong, I don't mean to minimize the big issues of our time. They're controversial and there's a lot of political combat around them. But if you look below that storm cloud, perhaps above it, you'll see bipartisan efforts like that taking place, where if you put a little thought into it, you can identify partners on the other side of the aisle who share the same priorities and the same vision for where we need to go, particularly in this case in the national security realm, and then grow from there. And so what we were able to do this year, and last year we were successful in securing additional funding for DIU and Ensign and its adjacent organizations, but in this year we grew that coalition, and now we have several House Republican members and several Senate Democratic members, not usually considered folks who get along, on this effort to once again provide the resourcing necessary to carry out these important things. So that's the first piece. The second, though, is a little more informal, and where I've really been proud of the partnership that we have is as we implement things like Section 222, just having the conversations and connecting dots. Like I said in my remarks, we are representatives of our constituents, and therefore we want to introduce our constituents to interesting opportunities that the Department of Defense and the federal government are providing so that we can support our national security, but also our people. And being able to connect Ensign with leadership at our HBCUs, but also they have existing partnerships with folks at our military installations and at other universities, and start to connect the dots so that students and faculty and military leaders know that each other is out there trying to solve the same problems and begin rowing in the same direction. And as a very specific example, I'm really excited, correct me if I'm wrong, Bev, but the summer fellowship program that Ensign runs, X-Fellows, X-Force Fellows, apologize, is just such an outstanding opportunity where you have the opportunity to bring students and military, bring them onto military installations and do a fellowship and get exposed to not a made-up problem that somebody crafted, but an actual requirement that needs to be met, and to have those conversations directly with folks in uniform, to the previous question about that exposure, and get the fulfillment, but also of solving a real problem, but also the knowledge that build there. So, and we're trying to build on efforts that were already existing to grow those efforts, particularly at our HBCUs in this case. And so playing that more informal role that you won't see anywhere in Section 1 of the Constitution of connecting people to other people, to ideas, to ultimately new capabilities and solved problems is a role that Congress, I think, in an individual Senate office like ours can play productively and useful.
Right.
Allison is, I think she's made more connections with HBCUs in Georgia than in any other state. So shout out to Allison.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are at that time. The time we spent here with our panelists and our speakers today reminds me of a quote that's credited to Sir Isaac Newton. He said, "If I've seen further than others, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants." And we have had the opportunity to be in the presence of intellectual and servant leadership giants today. So would you join me in just giving them a round of applause to thank them for their time and expertise today? And that includes our National Security Forum. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.